I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's Farmington School Board meeting. It's August 17th. We're first going to start off with a workshop. We had Linda Laughlin with us, and I think if you want to open up, Ruth Ellen, what we're going to be hearing and what we're going to be learning tonight.
Back in February, the board had voted to begin the strategic design process for the district, and then things went a little bit sideways this spring. So the event that we had planned for June did not happen, but we're looking to kind of regroup, have that conversation with our new members, and give everyone an opportunity to see what's possible and where we're looking to go. So, thank you, Linda.
There I am. Ruth, I think I heard a part of what you just said. Are you over?
It's you now, Linda. Thank you.
Okay, all right, okay. My understanding is I'm talking with your full school board. Is that correct?
That's correct, plus a few members of the public, as this is a public workshop.
I got it. Okay, great. Well, thank you folks for giving me a few minutes today. I'm more interested in hearing what your questions are, but I do want to give a quick sort of summary of the strategic design process that I perform and that we talked about in February of this past year. So generally what I try to do is recommend for school systems to set a strategic direction for all of the members of their school community that allows the community to sort of express their desires for what their school system will be like, kind of what are the key priorities and so forth. And then it also does provide that direction for the rest of the board, of the entire school board, but also the entire school community when it comes to making decisions around whether they be policy issues, curriculum, instruction, assessment, and so forth. So what I'm showing you here is I've got just 8 different slides. I think it's 8, maybe it's 9, 10 slides here. And Misty, what you're going to, hopefully, if you can forward these slides along so that I can see this full screen, the full, all the details for this particular slide. The activity that we talked about in terms of getting a lot of community members together is rather strategic when it comes to deciding like who will be in the room. And your goal is to bring together as many different stakeholders as you can, because this is not about just simply talking with those folks. This is about leveraging their expertise. And so I try to guide a school system in terms of kind of thinking about who the stakeholder groups might be that are in your community, and then you folks sort of make some decisions about who to invite based on who fits those particular stakeholder positions. So if you can imagine up to, close to, you can decide on the number, but let's say, we assume we kind of feel like we can bring together as many as 80 to 100 people together. The goal would be that people would come together in small groups, and that I usually facilitate through a series of prompts the development of these documents that you see listed here on the screen. So the guiding principles, your values, your mission statement, your exit outcomes for your graduates, and then a group of vision statements. And so there is a kind of a process that I've used for a number of years that I find I have found to be way more successful than the many different visions that I was involved in, vision building that I was involved with as a school administrator and a school teacher. To give you a little bit of background, this would be my 41st year in education. The first 36 was as a public school, either teacher or school administrator. I finished my public school career 5 years ago, and at that time I was holding assistant superintendent in a school system that serviced about 3,000 students. And so over the course of my career, having taught at the high school level and then been a high school principal, I was involved with a number of different vision building kinds of activities. And when I came across this process and was fortunate enough to experience this in my own system, I found this to be way more powerful. Mainly because of the language that I use up here at the top, that this is more of a future-focused kind of process where we're going to ask all those stakeholders that are in the room to really identify what the future conditions are that they can imagine will be present within their own careers over the course of the next 10 years. So rather than just kind of use a needs assessment and say, let's build a vision for, a current vision for our system, this is a way to encourage those folks to really think about what the world is going to be like for the individual, the learners that are actually in your system now. And so the left side is really the left side of the slide represents the work that is being done in part of that 3-day process. And I say 3-day process, it's about 12 to 14 hours that are spread out over 2 or 3 days. Then what happens is the documents that are produced by this group will then lead to giving everybody the direction for strategic alignment. And so the way I kind of envision this, Misty, if you could move to the next slide, this is sort of a visual of what a district looks like when there's really no fine, direction. Everybody has their own expertise. There are very talented people, involved in the system and so forth. But yet, if the organization has no direction or doesn't have a clear direction, then you kind of you notice that these things, the arrows are going all around. If we go forward to the next slide, and that would be 2 slides from now. Yeah, there we go. When you participate in this strategic direction activity with your stakeholders, what you're going to do, and if you would keep pushing the button there on that slide, Misty, what you'll do is you'll generate, as I said, these documents, the guiding principles, your mission, your vision, your exit learner outcomes, and even more importantly, your core values. So one more click, I think, Misty. There we go. And so what happens then is the organization begins to see the direction that you collectively want to take. But then it defines those core values, which really defines how people will operate within the system. There's still, notice that you still need to spend some time after that to really focus on the alignment piece. And so when you end up kind of aligning your policies, your practices, your school personnel and so forth to your vision, you kind of get into the habit of making decisions specific to your mission and your vision, then what ends up happening is little by little, these arrows will all line up. And so the next slide kind of shows that you now have everyone sort of moving in the same direction. I'd like to point out that in this visual, the arrows are still very different looking, different colors, different sizes, because you're still going to leverage the expertise of people within your organization. But when I come, let's say if I'm a person that you employ for this coming year, and you have this mission and vision, and you've gone through this process and done some alignment work, it's very clear to me as an employee the direction you're taking and what my goals should be as an employee of the system. So I'm less an entrepreneur and more of a team member in the organization itself. The next slide just simply outlines something I mentioned before, that this is a future-focused kind of process, which is why I like it better than many of the other processes that I ever was involved with. The next slide will outline for you that when people are in the room working within small groups, in the beginning of the process, we'll outline things like the guiding. We'll create our guiding principles, our core values, our mission statement, and so forth. And then what happens is, in order to leverage the expertise of people from many different careers and so forth that are in the room, what we do is we ask them to sit within these groupings, what we call the spheres of living. So the theory here is that any learner graduating from your high school will live in all of these spheres in their lifetime. And so they need to have some critical, kind of competencies when they leave within the economic sphere, the civic sphere, and so on and so forth. And so what we'll do is we'll ask folks in the room to group themselves based on this. So if you can imagine a financial person, kind of person that either works at the bank or is a loan officer, maybe sitting there and be able to predict better than we could, what the economic sphere will look like. What will the competencies be for any individual? Now, this is not about saying if they're going to become a loan officer what they need necessarily, but it does mean that we identify what are the learner outcomes that anyone should have within the economic sphere. Same thing with the civic piece. Hopefully you'll get stakeholders that will be in either state or federal government. Some of you as board members could be considered government, kind of people in the civic sphere, and then you would have the opportunity to kind of think about and relay what you think the future conditions are. From there, those future conditions immediately turn into learner outcomes. And so then this is kind of a summary slide that explains a little bit about what will happen. So we've got 12 to 14 hours to create the strategic design. And again, those are spread out over either 2 or 3 days. After that work is done, I will take the raw data from that and I would write you a draft strategic direction. Now, again, I always have that conversation with the group about whether you want me to do that initial draft or whether you want to try to bring a group of writers together. I worry a little bit and just caution you that sometimes that's a pretty painful activity to write from the real raw data. So what I try to do is bring that together for you. And then you as a leadership team would then start to look at that draft strategic direction, receive feedback from staff and community members, and then hopefully you would feel comfortable at that point to officially approve that as your strategic direction. And then at that point, your leadership team and your staff begin to use that as the decision-making kind of document. So now I'm trying to kind of go quickly through that process, and I think that we'll leave it right there for now. And I'd rather open up for questions, and maybe then I'll go back to the slides and point out a few other things that I might have here for you. But I think what's best now at this point might be to find out what questions that you folks have.
Any more questions, Linda? At this
And
point?
maybe I should add Ruth Ellen, Miss Theory, Charlie, we had a conversation a while back here a few weeks ago. You might have some things that either we determined as we were talking with each other, or that I said back then that I failed to say now that you think is important to kind of point out, to add to this.
So in this strategic design process, you're proposing sounds like 2 separate nights trying to enlist as much community participation or stakeholders to give us input for what we should be, which would boil down to a strategic direction. And then based upon that, formulate that into a document which would assist in implementation of making that happen. Is that a good summary of this?
Yep, I would agree with you. That's a good summary. Who's talking, by the way? I can't tell.
Charlie. Sorry, Charlie. Charlie King.
Charlie. Yes, Charlie. Yep.
Tim, you got any questions at this point?
I think I understand the process, but Linda, if the community, Linda, this is Tim Brown, if the community defines our educational system as wanting to have a technology component in almost every aspect, how would something like that look in your strategic plan as an example?
Okay, Tim, I didn't hear part of that, your second sentence there. If the community decided Something about technology?
You might
If
want
you-
to turn your mic on your computer.
Probably gonna get feedback. I'll try it.
Misty, could
Can you-
turn
can you hear me
on
now?
your cam so that I could see them? That might make it easier also.
Can you hear me now, Linda?
I can't sort
Okay.
It's a little muffled a little bit, but I'm going to try. Let me
That's,
see.
that's just the way I talk. My microphone's on. I guess what I'm trying to visualize is what would be the strategic processes. And as an example, if the community came forward and said, in every aspect of our education, we want some technology component because our children are going to have to deal with technology no matter what life choices they make later on. How would something like that be defined in a strategic plan? Or am I seeing something totally off base?
No, that would be, it's a good question. So there are two places where that may show up, Tim. One would be under the spheres of living. There could be some folks that there could be like a theme, you could start to see a trend of folks within the different spheres of living saying that technology is critically important and that, like it could be that finance person says, banking online and so forth are skills that our learners need to have, and those are critical these days. Then there's also, from there, after you outline or you identify those particular learner outcomes within those spheres of living, then what we will be doing is asking the group to then group into these particular areas. Thank you, Misty. These particular areas. One of the last things that you do when you do this process is that you break folks up into vision components. And so there's a vision, or what you can see here on the slide is called transformational technology. And at that point, what's happening there is that folks are taking into account everything that they heard over the course of the 12 to 14 hours and saying, okay, what would be our vision? What should it look like for technology? What should it look like for, and there are a lot of other categories here, skilled leadership, personnel, what should instruction look like, and so on and so forth. So I think at that point, I would suggest that most times what I see from different systems is that they'll come up with, be very clear in their vision for technology, that there be a component intertwined over all through your curriculum, through instruction, and so on and so forth.
Okay. So I guess my next question is as we bring the stakeholders in the community together, how do we identify those needs, or how do we solicit from them their concepts on defining the educational system? Is that the process that you're going to take hold of? Is it suggestions that we kind of plant the seed and generate the conversation? What does that process look like?
It's really part of the process that I facilitate.
Okay.
So it'll be under each of those categories, developing those 5 strategic documents that we have at the beginning, on the first slide. So you'll ask people, what are your guiding principles? What do you believe are the guiding principles for your education system here? And then I'll go in there. From there, I'll say to them, okay, now what we want to do is hear from you about what should be the core values of this education system. And kind of we walk through the entire process. And it wouldn't be a case where I would put out a rather general question. What do you think the school should be like? But it's still, by the time you go through and develop each of these different documents, then you will get what you just asked for.
Nice. My last question would be, as we're trying to develop that core group and bring people from the community in, what aspect of the community would we be looking for? The entire community, or parents of students, or a mix of both?
Good question. What I recommend, what I have sent to Ruth Ellen and Misty is a spreadsheet with suggested stakeholder groups across the top. And I encourage any planning group to look at that list and then add any other groupings first. Then from there, sort of focus on, okay, then who are the people within our community that might fill these roles? The other thing I suggest is that you go no more than 50% school people versus community people. You're working really hard to get a good 50-50 balance between educators and community members who have, are involved in other careers other than education.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other board members with questions for Linda? I'm not hearing any. Linda, if you want to continue?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things that I would just sort of, kind of conclude with is to say that right now, the challenges of, COVID and so forth, what I'm finding from the schools that I'm working with that have gone through this process, they at least have, maybe a stronger set of, stronger direction and a stronger set of documents that is guiding the decisions that they're making. It's still not any easier for them than it is anyone else. But I am beginning to see that when a system has kind of engaged the entire community in this conversation, that they do have that kind of common direction. It's a little bit easier for them to make the tough decisions that you're all making here right now in terms of just the virus and kind of how your education system will respond and react to that. The other thing then, going to the actual logistics of the process, back when we first began talking about this in February, we all imagined that we would all be together in a room to do it. And that's always how I've done it, because I haven't run a system like this since COVID. And so what I just mentioned to Misty and Ruth Ellen on a kind of a brief phone call back a while back was that I'm more than willing to consider how there might be ways in which we can use online connections like this to break out into small groups and come back and give it a try. I just will be honest with you, I think it's important to determine how is, what's the urgency? Are you feeling like you really need this work done and it would be really, really helpful for you? And should we consider ways in which we might be able to bring people together online? Again, assuming that you can get a commitment from people, from that 50 to 100 people. Or do you want to hang and wait a little bit until the spring to see? And that's really entirely up to you folks. I'm not making a specific recommendation other than to say that the work is really important for a system to kind of move forward in a more of an innovative direction. And it's a decision that you have to make about, how quickly and how soon do you think that you really want to embark on this. And I'm willing and open to kind of try to problem solve either way. I'm pretty convinced with the work that I've been doing with folks using not this particular online technology, but another one, that I can find a way to engage people. But it's just going to be a little trickier than if you're all in the same room together.
So I guess one question I have, Linda, is Charlie King. Again.
Yep.
Once we take this step, what I guess would be the other major steps before we could implement this change at the educational level or the curriculum level? And then what do you normally see as the major changes or differences between the curriculum before and after this process is undertaken?
Yeah, I think the biggest change initially is in the policy work that you folks do, for sure. I mean, this would cause you to want to kind of look at some of the policies that are driving the development of curriculum, your kind of reporting strategies, your technological strategies. And so all of those policies that you folks as policymakers control, you're going to want to take a good look at a lot of those and start to do your work. In the meantime, what you're going to see is the people within your school system. I mean, Ruth Ellen and Misty, they've got to go to work with their leadership team and looking at the document, the results, and saying, okay, then what does this mean for curriculum? For me, what I've seen is that curriculum, my strong recommendation is that it turns in, and again, now, Charlie, I'm assuming that that large community of people are going to come up with something similar to what I've seen in the past, right? And so assuming that that's going to happen, and that you're looking at a very innovative kind of approach and direction, then my recommendation is to kind of look at curriculum and start to identify your curriculum in a learning progression model, which means instead of defining all those different activities and assignments that learners are going to complete, instead it's about staff looking at what the learner outcomes are. So remember that I said that your stakeholders are going to come up with learner outcomes, exit learner outcomes, those things that every graduate needs to know and be able to do. Your staff will now need to take those and unpack those into specific learning goals and progressions. And depending on the approach that you take on how you develop those, it can take a while, it can take several years to kind of work through that, or it can be a year or so. It just depends. Like, for instance, a lot of schools have done some of that work, and if your staff is open and willing to kind of look at those sample progressions and then adjust them to fit their needs, it's a lot shorter process than to try to start developing those all from scratch. And I know that Misty has done that in systems she's been in before, and she's really good at that. And she probably has some, she'll be able to kind of give you some feedback on which direction or which method she would like to use. But you asked the specific question, how quickly can all this start to evolve? I'd be honest with you, it's going to take a few years of developing and changing practice with all the staff members that you have there, all your teachers and educators. But there are going to be some steps that you're going to see right off. But again, the bigger steps of changing the curriculum, full-blown change of instruction across multiple staff members, those kinds of things are going to take a bit of time.
Misty, do you want to add anything at this point regarding those steps and where you think we should proceed?
Where's the chairman microphone?
You can hear me from there. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
So just what Linda said, I've already kind of started some of that work.
I have
several models for teachers to look at, and I'm going to ask them to power vote on whether they want to build from scratch or whether they want to take a model and edit it from its current state to what we like.
So I'd like
teachers to vote on that. Because I can work with them whichever way they decide to go. But I do feel strongly we need to get to the place where we're talking about the destination of learning, the instructional goals and progressions, rather than the stuff we have kids do on time.
So
we've already started actually some of that work initially, foundationally.
Where have we started that, and what have we accomplished so far?
Right
now we're in the phase of learning about it. And I'm hoping that this fall we can start actually taking some action with it. I'm going to give a full big training this August when they come back.
Charlie, I would add to your question, because it's a good question. I think it's about shifting the focus from doing, like I kind of, in quotes, I say doing school, walking through the process of completing activities and assignments, to shifting that focus to actually learning and measuring what learners know and can do. And I think probably the reason why I like that the best is because of the feedback I always receive from business leaders within my own community about how our graduates were just not leaving school with the skills that business leaders wanted. That that when you employed people, they weren't able to do some of those essential skills. And so this is more of a, rather than saying that they've sat in the seat for X number of hours or days and years, and the teacher has covered the content, instead, this is about really measuring what learners know and can do. So it's a different shift. And again, I'm making some assumptions here. I've not been in a community yet where they didn't come together in the room and sort of communicate that they want their graduates to have a kind of a common set of competencies. So, assuming that your community is going to do that, that's probably going to be the biggest change, is shifting the culture within that your learning communities to be focused more on the learning and what learners can know and be able to do versus how many activities and assignments and years and hours that they've sat in seats talking about it.
Any other questions from board members? Josh, Stan, or Joel?
I'm all set. I'm all set, thank you. I'm good, thank you.
Ruth Ellen, go ahead.
I guess my question would be to the board, do you have a sense of when you would like to see this happen? Would you prefer to do it in public? Would you prefer waiting to be able to have an in-person event? Do you want us to start planning something that would be more of an online event?
Discussion? Tim?
Just my opinion, I'm not speaking for the board, but I think a good part of our community, that was the reason I asked one of the questions, is our elderly community. I think they can bring a lot to the table. They may not have the technology that we have or be able to facilitate the online meetings. This project is important to me, but I think it's an entire community project, and if it means whatever that month is that we happen to get out of here.
Unless we do a hybrid.
Kind of the way I'm leaning.
I mean, that brings up a good point. There's some of the hurdles that we have to get over in the next 2 months. Are going to keep us pretty busy.
No question.
And with the start of school and the 4 to 6 weeks period, we may have a transition into a different learning model. We also have some elections coming up that, hopefully there'll be no significant change as far as demands on us educationally from the state. Assuming that everything is going to maybe continue the way it's been going with some changes based upon any pandemic-related new requirements. I mean, we may have to be towards the end of the year or beginning of next year. If you start looking at dates, you get around the holidays, it's tough to get people to participate. Weather sometimes is an issue when we get into deep snow season in January and February, so maybe you could have a window between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and maybe after that would have to be more towards the spring. I don't know. What did you have for thoughts?
Can I just say this one thing about how we're funding it? We need to do it in this year, like before September 21st, the 30th.
Of next year.
Of next year.
Right.
Of next year.
So
Yes, between
with our funding source, we need to get this completed by September 30th of 2021.
Okay.
Because that's when our grant runs out.
That's September of next year.
next year.
Next year.
We have a year.
Right.
Okay.
So we have a year, but we don't have a couple of years.
Right.
Well, the process can be quite lengthy to begin with, so I think the sooner we start, the better we're going to be, because we can get into it as much as possible. And I think this kind of discussion could be good for the community, especially in the part where we're doing school a little bit different than they think. So they might be able to see and give us some input into different things that we don't really necessarily think about. So I'm in favor of starting as soon as possible and doing it virtually so we can stay safe and get all of our opinions and get our discussion going.
Joel or Josh?
I would echo Stan.
Did you have any, month of the year that you think might make sense in this year?
Well, I mean, I guess I would default to Misty. Misty, you said you're going to be doing some training at the beginning of the year.
you must have a vision of a timeline in your mind.
Well, it's more aggressive than most people would like, but,
Well, hey, put it out there. Yeah.
Well, and the training
I'm doing is really around the instruction and learning goal piece, but,
you know, I would say to you this,
if you wanted to do it digitally and you wanted to do it this fall, I wouldn't do it any sooner than, end of October, early November.
That
That gives us time to really leverage people and
really
think about how to plan that digitally. And maybe by then we come together physically, I don't know, but it would give us that time to know that, and also plan for which way it ends up,
if that makes sense.
I don't think we want to try to rush it.
Right. And I would concur. I think we're looking at the budget process in the middle of all of this too. Certainly the discussions can inform the budget process. And having that late October, early November might be a good melding of that.
I do like that timeline as well. I think that sounds useful. Get the staff sometimes they need back in, get the training that they're going to offer, and by then I think the public will be ready to come in and join us. So I like that timeline.
I'm okay with that proposed timeline also. I think that end of October, beginning of November, I think the end of November is kind of busy. And
Can I suggest something also?
go ahead, Linda.
Still hear me? I would might try to just kind of put your toe in the water and check with people in the community just to get a sense of, get that number of people engaged and committed for an event like that, like by the end of October as well. So that, I would want you to, my suggestion would be to make it a priority to be sure that you've got a number of different stakeholders and community members committed. And so if you came up with some dates in early November maybe, and then you started the process in this month of August, September, and you found that you were having difficulty getting that commitment so quickly, then you might then be flexible a little bit with your timeline, that's all. So the priority is to get the right people in the room. So.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at the calendar and I came up with November 10th and 11th. But I think it's important to look at our current town meeting schedules because a lot of those people that we're going to want to have at the meeting may have meeting commitments.
Correct.
And I think that's kind of important to look around. I picked those dates because I have meetings on the 3rd and the 17th is a Tuesday. And if you're going to say have back-to-back meetings, there's going to be 2 nights back-to-back. And is that typically how it's done? I assume they're going to be during the week.
Typically, I think, Linda, when we talked about this before, we looked at doing perhaps a Thursday, a Friday night, and then a Saturday, so that it was a couple of evenings and then a longer event.
Yeah, the reason why we tend to look at those days, we're making some assumption that, we're trying to make some assumptions about when is the best time for community members to take time away from work. And, assuming that there may be a block of people that work Monday through Friday, a commitment during the middle of the week is harder than towards the end of the week. But again, you folks would have to kind of think about who your stakeholders are and decide. The challenge is that I feel really strong about is the process is powerful, but only when you have a commitment of the community members that are going to commit for the whole time. So when I coach people about when you're identifying folks and then you're making those invitations, that you make it clear that it doesn't work very well when people are in and out, where they can put in a couple hours here or there. It's really trying to find a commitment for folks to commit through the whole process.
And the 11th is Veterans.
The 11th is Veterans Day, so we won't have school, but
I was just throwing, I mean,
Right, no.
it may be that
It
you,
works best if you do Thursday, Friday evening, and Saturday, because normally people, and usually it starts around 3 o'clock, so it's not full evening, it goes to later in the evening, and then one full day. And that schedule allows for most people to be able to commit to that time and not really have to take off work. And often, in both districts that I've done it, we've had our high school groups that do community service around childcare for parents.
So I guess it would be, at this point, I think up to you guys to kind of start maybe a base list of who you think those stakeholders need to be and what days make sense to try to go forth in the community to get those people to say, yeah, I can do that.
And we're certainly going to want to brainstorm some lists with you folks too.
You guys have to help.
You have a different perspective maybe than we do.
Tim?
The stakeholder body, how many, Linda, in your experience, how many people is that normally?
Well, the question was how many different stakeholders, or?
How many stakeholders would you bring together within the community to start the strategic process? We're a town of about 6,000, 6,500.
Yep.
Yeah, so I would encourage you to shoot for something like around between 75 and 100. And then if you get 75 on your list, then, and you told me you had 75 on the list, I would be assuming that, you know, from my experience, that you're going to end up with probably 55 or 60 that actually show up in the room.
Okay. Just, again, I just want to reiterate my concern in that, you know, we've got an election coming up in town. Normally we have 14 absentee ballots. There's over 200 that have been filed to date and more coming in. So I'm really worried about what aspect of the community that we're going to have come forward that are, you know, filing an absentee ballot in a process that takes 10 to 15 minutes versus coming together with us for a weekend. And I think that cross-segment of the community for a project of this scope is important. And my only concern as a board member is that as we build that body, and we may, if we put the feelers out, as we build that body, we want that good cross-section of the community. And maybe we try to get that cross-section, but if we fail, then we put it off to a little bit later date with a target of, you know, what is our absolute date that we have to start this process without rushing so that we turn out a really good product before the end of the grant.
The other thing that we might be able to look at is if we end up doing a bit of a hybrid model, is if we have technology within the district that we could leverage to have people come in, you get a room, you get a room, you get a room, but it would give them an opportunity to have access to the technology with some support. So, a thought there.
So I think that Linda has a list of the type of people that we need, so we can start collecting those names and tell them what we're going to do, how it's going to work. You do need some time to design what the meetings are going to look like and how they're going to operate, and what is your virtual meeting, you know, venue going to be, and things like that. So once you have all that stuff, you can make that public so that people can see what it is they're getting into, and then we can invite them. And hopefully they will participate, because they'll be invited and they'll want to participate in the process.
The most successful to get the most people is when we make personal phone calls and we go to see people personally. I know in my last district when we did it, we got 120 people. And it wasn't, we didn't just shoot emails out and do things, you know, impersonally. Like, we literally called people personally. We went to see people personally. And that's kind of you know, we have to do that kind of leveraging. And everybody did. Board members did, teachers did. We all took part, and we made our list of people we wanted, and we broke it up. And we all went out and took our 10 or 12 and went after those people to come to the table. That's really the kind of way that we have to do it, because that's how we get the cross-section we want. That you know, we're not going to get 100 of the same stakeholders who we want to, but we want 3 or 4 of those people that are kind of in that group, because they can speak for that larger sort of group of people. But it's really that personal connection piece that's going to get people to the table. Dan said, really explaining it to them, talking to them about why they would be a really good person to come and be a part of that, and what they can, really help us to leverage.
Basically, it's like a personal request in some
Yeah,
cases
the personal
to say,
invitation.
hey, we need you here.
Yeah, the personal invitations are what works.
When would you see that process starting, Misty?
Soon, as
Like
soon
now?
as we,
Yes.
yeah, like as soon
Okay.
as we set a date, like we need to get our grid up there, we all need to start adding people into those groups, and then we need to start saying, all right, well, Diana knows this group, she's gonna go talk to, I'll go talk, we'll all spread the wealth, so to speak, and
So
everywhere.
will you be distributing that list of the type of, I guess, work experience or life experiences that you're looking for, and asking us to say, give you some names of who
Yeah.
those people
You
may
bet.
be?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We have a spreadsheet already, we'll share it with you, and you guys can look at that, and if there are things on, like a group that isn't on the list that you want to add that you think should be there, that's what we kind of will do. Yeah. Because there may be a group of people that aren't listed there that you really think would benefit for help, with helping us.
Okay.
And then we create, web splashes, advertisement, we get it on our Facebook, we do all that stuff too, social media, print pieces, but ultimately, it's the
phone calls.
It's the phone calls.
Face to
and the
face.
personal connections that get people to the table.
Ruth Ellen, can I ask, I think, was it Tim that was mentioning about maybe moving the date out a little bit?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Can you give me some ideas of like how longer do you think it would be, that you think it would be a better, process, would have better chance of getting the right people in the room?
I don't know that right now, Linda, and it may be a premature concern, but realistically, what I'd be looking for in this subset is a representation of some of the people that founded this community, to invite them to the process. And I'm not sure that if we don't have a drastic change or somebody doesn't say, hey, we're safe now, I'm not sure that that's going to happen, and I would hate to miss that aspect of the community. So I guess the solution to that would be find a way that we can incorporate them into the process that we're trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think this may be new as far as to complete this task with some of the constraints that we're dealing with. But I'm sure you guys will come up with something you're going to recommend to us.
Well, I guess what we need just as a framework from you is when, what time frame do you feel comfortable with, and then we can work from there.
I mean, I'm okay with the time frame that's been batted around a little bit.
If our
basically
target
at the
is
beginning
that
of November.
second full week in November,
I think that's enough time to get over some of the things that we've got to deal with, and it's just whether or not when we start reaching out to people, can we get some commitment from like some important stakeholders, like Tim had said, who may have concerns about being in large groups or may not be technically savvy well enough to do it online because it's not their life experience.
Right.
I guess
Those are really valid, those are valid concerns. What I'd like to do, if it's all right with you folks, is that over the course, if you can get some conceptual approval and some kind of direction on the date, that maybe over the next couple of weeks, that I'd like to meet with Ruth Ellen and Misty and try to problem solve the pros and cons to doing things entirely online versus hybrid. And also maybe some different things that you would do with your stakeholders once you get a commitment that would, for instance, if it was online, what kinds of supports would you give folks? Like what kind of questions would you ask them when you invite them? And how would you identify those people who would need some extra support to be sure? Because I think those would be my concerns as well, is that you want to be sure that if somebody's invited and they want to participate, that they don't get frustrated with the technology and then feel like they didn't get their, you don't want that to become the controversy in your community, is the fact that some were able to participate and some were not. So Maybe if we had some time to really bat that around with some, some really serious thinking about how that might look.
Right.
So I guess my comment is, I'll go with what the administration thinks is the best process as far as a start date, with the concept in mind that we may have to be creative in bringing some people to the table, or we may have to use our strengths that we have by splitting up the board in different rooms so that we can work with some of the elderly people or the different sectors that we have in the community to make it happen. So I guess if November is the target, hopefully the virus will be gone by then. But as we're thinking of the process, I think we need to think of that encompass of how do we not miss the valuable input of the new people coming into the community and what they envision the community headed towards, and the people that founded the community.
Any final thoughts? Well, I want to thank you, Linda, for doing this presentation again. I know you did it for me a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. I don't know, time flies when you have fun.
Thank you.
And,
You're welcome. I'll wait to hear back, okay?
okay, I'm sure that Ruth Allen and Misty will be in touch shortly.
We will.
right.
Thank you so much.
So at this point, we're going to have our regular meeting at 7 o'clock. Make a motion for a 5-minute recess.
Second.
Any discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, see you in 5. Back online.
Okay, I have you back in Google Meet.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone back to our Farmington School Board meeting. It's August 17th. Would you all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I think we have, hopefully we have our public participation phone number listed up. And we are allowing public participation at this meeting, so if somebody wanted to come in person and attend, we do have seating for several people. So the door is always open. I'll leave the public portion open during the meeting, so if somebody wants to call in, feel free at any time. Next on our agenda, we have some meeting minutes, which have been kind of kicking around. We have meeting minutes from July 13th, 2020, sealed, non-public, and minutes of July 20th, 2020, non-public, sealed. How does the board want to handle these minutes?
I've got a request for an amendment on the 20th. So I'd move that we move the sealed minutes into non-public.
So we have a motion to table till later in the meeting? Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Not hearing any, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next on the minutes, we have the meeting minutes of August 3rd, 2020, public session. Do we have any discussion or motion?
Make a motion to approve as written.
We have a motion to approve as written. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Joel. Any discussion? Not hearing any discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Okay, so we have unanimous by the full board, which is in attendance. Next in our old business, the first thing we have is discussion on sports for this school year. So I think we have Eric Larkham.
Eric, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, so we have, I wanted to speak about sports. We had some decisions made a little bit here, trying to bring up sports and what we want to do here for the fall, kind of give a layout of what's happening on our governing side, the NHIA. They have sanctioned the fall sports. They put out a three-phase plan, which they put out for a couple phases already, and then we're in phase 3 now, in the sense of they're sanctioning it and they're leaving it up right to local control to help make those decisions based on the school. So my process, what I've done is I've also met with our athletic committee and going through what they feel could happen, possibly happened, suggestions, etc. Obviously, there's the risk component of the athletic side with the exposure. We looked at a variety of different things. What we've done, and the NHI has done, is we've looked at the sports that we do have and rated them based on a rating level of low, moderate to high. Obviously, that playing a factor with the exposure and risk level with the COVID-19. With that, there's, obviously we have sports of like football that has they're considered a high risk. There's soccer and volleyball, which is in the moderate section, and then we have golf that would be into the low section of risk. And take consideration of that, every sport has its guidelines, its protocols to modify. There's been rule modifications. The NHIA has kind of looked at not making it scheduled mandates. Typically in the season, we have a certain amount of games we have to play, but they're looking to deciding factor if they're going to play or not. So that being said, I'd like to hear, obviously, Dylan also has a recommendation as well, but I want to kind of bring it up to the board to get the thoughts on what we feel as a school community and school board.
Okay, Eric, I'm going to lead right out playing devil's advocate. If we're not comfortable to open the schools, either in partial session and starting out fully remote, how could we feel comfortable as a board, starting with fall sports, which have either contact or players in close proximity? How can we feel comfortable doing that when we haven't felt comfortable starting kids back to school unless when absolutely necessary based upon their educational needs? Maybe you could answer that for me. And
yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, as we know, that we can do all these sports with no contact. And that's not going to be possible. And when you're making a decision like this, I'm not going to sit here and if we're going to have a soccer team playing, that they're not going to be in contact. It's obviously something that the board that has to take that obviously under consideration when thinking about it. And I do think about it when I say education. We have to provide these kids with education. We obviously having 250 kids at the high school level in one building is very, it's very hard to do with the things that we have. But understanding sports, there's a couple of different ways that, to me, I envision its own cohort that we can manage as its own cohort with a small number, knowing that there are still risks, etc. But knowing that it's also sports is something that parents are willing to sign their kids up for or not. But I understand the total side of if we're fully remote, how does that look to if we are saying that we can do sports as well? So that's kind of my first initial thought to that.
well, I guess my only other concern is even though that we can manage and track our cohorts and to make sure that, say, if Farmington, right now we have 0 cases as of this week by the state, on the state side, I looked today, I think last week we had 3. This week is none. There's none in our neighboring communities. If we start exposing ourselves to other teams which may have different exposures or risks, couldn't we be bringing additional exposure into the community through our sports teams and their contact with other residents of the state that may have areas that may have more cases or some exposures that we're not aware of until it's too late?
Yeah, so a couple of things with that. Obviously, to limit anything like that, we're going to take consideration protocols of screening and try to manage that side of it. But also the other side of being really purposeful, what the NHI did is basically we're taking our schedules that we schedule typically about 6 months out and scrapped them and looking at regional play in consideration of we have been looking at trying to see regionally play only, not even based on division, but regional play on things to consider such as what the opponents were doing, if we feel okay or safe to do that, knowing as ADs we've talked that, if I'm an AD and say we're in Farmington, we have a huge case load of outbreaks, that might be a consideration of not playing competitively against us.
Right.
Mr. King?
Go ahead, Joel.
A couple things. Mr. Larkham, I mean, when you talk about other schools and a potential risk involved with working with other schools, I mean, minimally, they have to be going forward with all the precautions that each sports committee has laid out for that particular sport, correct?
That's correct.
So, and they may choose to go over and above, but they certainly can't go below any kind of minimum standard that the sports committee has laid out that sport has to follow, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And so just so that we kind of have a clear picture here, there are 9 fall sports that New Hampshire offers in the state of New Hampshire. There are 9 fall sports. We only have 4 of them. And so I believe golf is considered a low risk. The NHIA has grouped these sports into low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. And golf is low, volleyball, soccer, I think you said earlier, is moderate, football high, correct?
Yes.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, and they've also laid out a much different schedule as to when these sports can start, because normally this date today, I believe, is usually the start of the fall sports season.
Yes, it is.
Okay. They pushed that to, I believe, September 8th, is that correct?
Yeah, the start date for first day of practice, and then another 2 weeks typically for competition after that. Unless it's a low risk sport, they can start about 2 days after the 8th.
All right, so I thought a document that I read, which was a press release from the NHIA, was that golf could start on September 10th if you opted in to do it, soccer and volleyball on September 18th, and football not until September 25th.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you have this document handy from the volleyball committee, but what are some of the precautions? Can you give us examples of what are some of the precautionary measures that, say, the volleyball committee has put forth if you decide to participate in volleyball contests?
Yeah, I have those right here. So they've looked at a variety of things. So for volleyball, some of the things like team benches, they typically swap in between sets. They're not gonna have that. Other things such as coin toss, when teams kind of meet together, they're suspending some of those. Things with the official tables, having social distancing during then. The pre-match ceremonies, which typically includes, your typical handshakes, etc., meeting your team and the other team and the officials. It's another thing that has happened is in a typical season, like face masks, coverings. It's not something that is allowable now. They allowed it, based on choice. Understanding that, as I know the volleyball committee and any other committee really did not feel it was a safe thing for students with being physically active to mandate to have when they're physically active, but did consider it as an option. So they looked at cleaning of equipment. So in volleyball, they looked at having a higher variety of game balls available, so that once there's a certain part that the home team's responsible to having sanitation of the ball as new ones come out. So those are just a few things that's just one sports committee. We have documentation of every other sports committee that's put out things like that to limit, again, the risk.
Okay.
Okay, I just picked volleyball arbitrarily because, the reason I picked it was because I wanted to hear if there was going to be measures taken to sanitize the ball, because obviously it goes back and forth between hands. So it sounds like they thought that through.
Yeah, that's every sport. They have that. They took into consideration that as a big priority too, and allow as a pretty strict protocol. I will tell the board I was not able to attend the athletic committee meeting that Mr. Larkham held about a little over a week ago. I understand though the meeting was lengthy. It was a couple of hours. Is there anything from that meeting, Mr. Larkham, that you wanted to share with us that came out of that? What I did through that process kind of gave an update, kind of like how I have with our SAU level update, NHIA as well, going over things that they put in place for this season to try to make something happen. So it makes a decision for the local level to be as clear as possible and as upfront and transparent. But we really looked at different kind of sports, looking at different modifications that we could possibly put in place, seeing what's practical, some issues that might come up that we need to work through in regards to possibly transportation. That's obviously not just an issue with athletics, but just our education day, especially as we go up. But we'll consider things such as regional play, mandating, home game protocols with what's it going to be for spectators, what's it going to be for the away team getting here. We looked at a lot of those logistical things to help, as it was pretty, for the whole committee, they're pretty adamant that, they want this to happen for our kids. What capacity, it's obviously up to the board to decide, but at the end of the conclusion, other than the kids physically playing against each other, we're going to do all we can to make sure that we're going to limit as much as we can possible with the risk. But we also looked at things such as, coaches training, facility cleaning, extra staff support to help with home games, just re-looking at some of the things that you typically do in practices and scrimmages to just limit a lot of the exposure risk.
Mr. King, can I continue?
Go ahead, Joel.
Sorry, I don't want to take all everybody's time up, but, my decision-making when we had a unanimous decision to begin our school year remotely was primarily due to the fact that the superintendent wasn't convinced that we could get all of our precautionary measures in place to do our hybrid model. That's how I made my decision that evening. My question to Mr. Larkham is, you've looked at each individual sport that we have and the precautionary measures that the NHIA has set forth, as well as any additional measures that the athletic committee may be put in place over and above what the NHIA requires. Are there any precautionary measures that we couldn't meet by September 8th?
Okay, so are you talking about with precautionary measures? I think the only thing that comes to my mind is, when we actually get to the playing competitively, whether it's an inter-squad with our team or whether it's competing against other teams, such as a sport like soccer, the sport is, the authentic way of the sport is the kids will at some point, go inside that 6 feet, recommended guideline of being away from each other. Everything else, we can put precautions in place, but I'm not gonna, as a director, I'm not going to guarantee that all these kids are going to be 6 feet all the time when it comes to competition play or in a squad.
Right, but I'm talking specifically what the NHIA outlined. Are we able to meet all of their precautionary measures?
Yes.
Yeah.
And those are the things that we've looked at as something that's feasible.
My final question is, if I may, is my understanding that and this is, I think, somewhat unprecedented. It happened one year, I think, in spring sports when we had too much rain. If we're having open state tournaments, does that mean that we could just do internal play, like let's say almost like an intramural internal program, or play one particular school that's nearby multiple times and still qualify for the state tournament?
So after meeting with our Division 4 ADs, there hasn't been an official decision on the NHIA with the open tournaments, but that's what they're going towards, and that's why we've already scratched the schedule. So we could technically, like I said, we could literally not play a game, and pending what the invite for only thing that might not be is really decided is like standings for the tournament. What's that format of the tournament going to look like? So we could literally not play a game and possibly have that fact to still be able to be in that open tournament.
So the NHIA has identified low, moderate, high-risk sports that they've identified when we could stop practicing, when we could stop playing, but they have not made a decision yet on whether or not we're going to have an open tournament.
Not officially yet, no.
And when do we expect that? Are they giving any indication?
I have not got a real sense on what that decision date is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. King.
Okay, Diana Donato, go ahead.
So Diana Donato, Director of Student Services, but
Just
speaking...
yell for this one.
Oh,
Okay. That gets you to YouTube, but no, you can do that, but just that one needs to pick you up for
Just
Google.
speak louder.
Okay, I will speak louder. Diana Donato, Director of Student Services, but speaking to you tonight as a parent of two high school athletes. one thing about, sports is, and, Eric and Joel, I think I'll attest to both these things, that it's a key component for kids, just in terms of the socialization, the athleticism, the mood, and everything else. My son plays basketball. He plays on a team that is composed of many other students, and a number of them, I'm proud to say, are Farmington students. So he's been playing with them through most of the summer. I've seen other Farmington students on the teams that are playing against his team. So a lot of our students already are participating in sports. They do take precautions. Everybody in the stands is wearing a mask. The kids come in, and they were doing some screenings, making sure that we did an attestation that kids were okay, and they took a temperature. We're cleaning their hands. We're cleaning their hands in between, games. My daughter had been playing soccer all summer. Seacoast United is doing soccer. So a lot of this is already going on, and has been going on really, really safely. And a lot of the sports that we'll be looking at do occur outside, which, is a benefit in terms of, mitigating the impact of the spreading of the virus. Everything holds a risk, but I just would advocate it that if we could do it safely, it would be wonderful to see sports occur for Farmington students.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else from the board at this point?
I just got a question.
Oh, go ahead, Tim.
Mr. Lockham, how do we manage spectators at, say, a soccer game, and how do we control the population for notification of an exposure if one were to happen at one of our games?
So I believe you asked about spectators, like say at an outside soccer game, is that what you asked?
Yep, spectators, and how do we deal with contact tracing if we need it?
Okay, so my plan is to, again, some of the decisions would also be, as a board, decide some of these things as well, especially when it relates to spectators. For my recommendation, say for a soccer game, is I would have a check-in procedure where we would be screening fans outside to come into our game, trying to set that up to make sure that's happening, which is something that's not typical, so it would be something that I really try to organize so I know who's at the game, and just making sure that I'm highlighting social distancing. I look at things such as removing the spectator benches, and putting those, so maybe we put a bring your own chair or standing section where people are being social distance to control that. But as contact tracing, I'm looking to make sure recording who's at the game being a spectator. Not saying I'm charging admission or anything, but kind of set up a system like that where if I did charge admission, it's kind of like they come in and do that contact tracing, so that's available just in case if there's anything that's out there. But knowing when we're outside, obviously that some of the exposure risk is especially for spectators, comes to our athletes is dramatically minimized. As we go inside, because of volleyball, that's something that we're looking at, same type of procedures with check-in, even limiting capacity, which has been recommended by the NHIA, but also have that tracing of who's in, looking at possibly, for having rosters, so maybe there's only one parent from each athlete from the away team that's allowed to come in, or we make a decision not to have spectators come inside. Obviously open to any of that, looking at all the logistics, but that's kind of my thoughts on what's that going to look like.
Go ahead.
Mr. Lackham, do we, as parents for, let's say, volleyball or one of the soccer teams, are there releases of liability that are being signed by one of the parents or guardians to the district? And if there is or if there isn't, have any discussions been had with our insurance contractor?
I haven't had that conversation quite yet. Obviously, that'd be something, that we would, as Ellen and I, we would have to look at, to cover what that looks like for our district, and what's the best decision for our district. That's something that, we could look at, knowing that, because I did mention that unique to the sport, extracurriculars, it can be, you have a choice to do it or not. And if you do have a choice, what's that kind of protocols to get you into that? Maybe that'd be a waiver that we look at and consult with. to see if that is feasible to do, or if that's something we need to do, take as a precaution for our district. But definitely, I haven't had the experience of consulting with our insurance company about that at all. That could be something I do.
Ruth Allen?
Preliminary conversations I've had with Primex have said we can have a waiver signed. It doesn't necessarily do an awful lot one way or the other. It's what our comfort level is as far as exposure. They're not telling us we can't. They're not telling us go forth and do. They're saying just make sure you know what you're getting into. My concern with this, first and foremost, is our transportation. We are going to be very limited. We could potentially do some things on the weekends, but as far as getting student athletes to a meet after school at the same time that I'm also having to run buses, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do that with our out-of-district transportation as well right now. Even if COVID weren't an issue right now, busing makes me very, very nervous. We're down a driver, and we don't have the capability of doubling up that we have used in the past. So I'm not really sure what that's going to look like.
How far do we typically travel to a game?
Typically, we may go to Fall Mountain. We may go, oftentimes we're all over the place. This year, we certainly have a lot more opportunity to keep it local, to keep it much more regional. But I right now don't even have a bus that could get us to Milton. So
What if we said to parents, hypothetically, we're allowing you kids to play sports, but you've got to provide transportation? Is that an option?
it's certainly something that could be explored.
And Eric, with your experience of the kids that play, will they have that resource available to them?
Yeah, I mean, that, obviously, the sport that has a larger number of athletes on the team creates that obviously probability that they might not be able to, which could create an issue possibly with the bigger teams. But like I said, if with what the NHI is looking to do, we're not mandated to do our 2 to 3 games a week to fit the amount, the certain criteria of games in. So if we have to look at only being flexible, that we only play 1 game on a Saturday, and that's what we need to do, then that's what we do. All ADs are aware of that. Transportation is an issue on a normal year, and with this, it's going to be even more difficult. Understanding that that's what the NHA has done is allowed us to not have the mandation of games to give us flexibility. We're not looking to have 2 or 3 games a week. We're looking to only have 1 or 2 games a week, anyways. But with transportation, such as maybe something as low number like a golf team, we could look, that could be a lot more feasible, which we have done in the past, where transportation was a huge issue that we've had the parents, drive down with, obviously, with permission, et cetera, following all those protocols that we do in our district for transportation. But as I said, the number gets bigger on the team, it'll be a little more challenging, in the sense, especially in the sport that needs all the players, but something we could definitely explore.
Larry, you had something?
Larry Gordon, Facilities Director. I guess my question is, if we're having games, say volleyball, we're having them on the weekends, you're going to have practices, this and that. Do you plan on making arrangements to have the gym disinfected after each practice, after each game, on weekends?
Yeah, so or say, what we're looking at, say if it's indoor, is commonly touched areas being sanitized after before. So after everybody leaves on say a Saturday game in a gym, we'd have to look at trying to see, what are the hot spots that we want to sanitize, when would that need to happen before anyone else gets exposed. So I think we'd have to really sit down and look at some of those things for the outside, the commonly touched areas, we're looking at, such as the benches. We're going to look at is, what is something that maybe we gotta be who's responsible for who. If it's something as simple as just writing down a bench, it's possibly looking at something where the coaches follow some strict protocols on how to sanitize a bench. And other things that they're going to be responsible for in the game itself, such as the balls and other equipment.
But how are we going to ensure that those are met to the standards that Larry would need to ensure that this facility is as clean as it needs to be? I guess it would be my concern. I mean, he brings up a good point. You know, if we're going to allow, say, a game, and it's going to be in the gym, we're going to allow parents of students that travel here to come into the facility. That's a lot, based upon how we're cleaning now, I assume that would be a lot of work.
Yes.
And
expensive.
right, and
on a weekend with overtime.
Yes.
so, I mean, I don't know how we're going to accomplish that, and even if we could, because if we're taking the responsibility, and Larry's responsible for the facilities being clean, then how is he going to ensure that it's clean to the level it needs to be without having his personnel involved? And not faulting anybody that would want to help with being a volunteer, but if we're going to open up the school, say in 6 weeks, for students and teachers to be back here full-time to some extent, it just even highlights that even more, where we need to make sure that the facility is maintained to the highest level of cleanliness as possible based upon what we're experiencing. And I don't know, Ruth Allen, if you got any suggestions or thoughts on that? I mean, you got four different levels of contact. You got football is high, which is a lot of concern for me. Soccer, it would be the next in volleyball and golf, but we have transportation issues, we have facility issues. So in some ways, for me, I don't know if it's all or nothing, but even so, if we open up the facilities, how are we going to maintain the level of sanitation to even consider this?
Mr. King?
Go ahead, Joel.
Eric, one question, and this is in relation to some of the points that just came up. Do you have a date that the NHIAA has given the athletic directors that they have to notify them by at the state level if you're opting in or out?
There has not been, they came out with, we already passed the 14th as being a date for schedules, but with everything turning, that's not, they changed it. So now we're waiting for our next date. So we don't have a date saying we have to agree to play by this certain date.
Okay. And Ruth Allen, question for you. I know Co-Brown Northwood Academy has already started school. Are there other schools, private public academies or Christian schools that have already started that you're aware of?
They're starting within the next week. There are a few of the private ones that are starting within the next week. Rochester has a magnet school that started, but their secondary schools haven't started yet. Most are going to be either just before or just after Labor Day. I think the latest I've heard is the 14th.
Mr. King, is I'm not sure we really have to make a final decision tonight. I mean, if we're talking about September 8th being the first day of practice, I almost think, and I'm not trying to put off a decision, I mean, yes and no, but not for the sake of putting it off, but for the sake of being able to see some of these other schools that have opened up and what kind of challenges they're seeing or not seeing as a result of opening up before us. Why couldn't we wait until our next meeting to make a final decision? We could also iron out some of these facility cleaning things and questions that have already been brought to light.
Tim?
One of the other questions I'd have for the superintendent is, based on the plan with the volunteers cleaning, which I don't like, what does the union contract say? Can we actually do that? I can't imagine.
Can't.
Okay, so
can't.
so it would have to be our janitorial staff. It could get expensive, so I'm not opposed to waiting a week, But Eric, I'd like you to have those conversations with Larry so that we can kind of have this costed out. I'm willing to make a decision if it makes sense for the kids, but I'm not willing if it's not going to be safe, particularly if we're looking at any time in the near future, open up the building, we may need some of this indoor space to social distance like our gym. So if we have a game on a Tuesday night, we may need that gym Wednesday to have students in that are socially distanced, and it needs to be cleaned to the proper protocols, and it needs to be cleaned under Larry's auspice to make sure that it does get done right.
Yeah, and it may be that if we do wait a week, it may be that the SAU staff comes back and says, logistically, we can do this and we can't do that. Or we can do it all, or we can do none of it, or we can do just a small portion. I mean, some of the things I heard tonight, which made sense, if we're going to have an event, there's going to be a need for a sign-in required or a sign-in form with a phone number to maintain contact tracing for the people that need to do that. Screenings at the door, maybe a mask check, to make sure somebody has a mask if they're going to be in. Transportation is a big issue, along with the cleanliness. We have to spend a lot of money to get our schools ready with some safety screens and additional cleaning supplies. And we can't just say, okay, we want to do this, so let's do it, and basically blow up our whole cleaning protocol just because we decide we want to have an indoor volleyball game and let people come into the community when we don't have a plan of how we get a facility back up to snuff by the next day. And what happens if my concern is, like, say if we do have an indoor volleyball game and through contact tracing, somebody who comes in the facility, not from this town, has exposure, and then all of a sudden we have exposure of a team, but also the facility, and what are going to be our protocols to handle with that, and does that make sense with what we're trying to accomplish educationally?
Right.
I mean, it's because the last thing, well, one of the concerns I had is if we had a potential exposure by a team member that's also a student, are we basically, based upon our plan to deal with any infections, is that going to put us where we may allow this to happen, but the first time we have something happen, because it may come in from our sports program, that we end up shutting the school down?
Right.
Educational needs, because not so much a student became infected at a game, but because of the contact tracing, which is somewhat comes to us and say, hey, this is the exposure in another community. Those people, some of those people are here, and now we've got to go through our circle of people who may not test positive, but what are we going to do from that procedurally?
Right, and in the meantime, it's one of the things that has been mentioned, and I know, Eric, you alluded to it, and I know that it's been in NHIAA conversations, is that the athletes become a cohort. And that works if you're looking at the athletes they're on the sports teams, they're together, but if they are doing their academics remotely, then that's the only group with which they're interacting. But if then you have those same students coming in a hybrid model, or if we're in with restrictions, then those students are exposed to a much larger number of students, and contact tracing gets that much more interesting. We're not there yet, and I'm not trying to create barriers before we get there, just recognizing that we may have some ongoing hoops to jump through and make sure that we're ready to jump through those. I would love to be able to say yes. I'm still looking to see where I can do that and have it make sense. I am concerned about making sure that we can maintain those cleaning protocols.
I mean, it may be that if we were to consider one, that those games could only be on a Friday night, when we have potentially adequate time, which would be on overtime, unless we could juggle people's schedules to do it on a weekend or a Saturday.
It'd still be overtime, probably.
Right, but because during the week, it may not be feasible. You're not gonna have a game that goes till 9 o'clock, 9:30, and then have people work all night to get the facility.
My other concern as you're talking about cohorts is some of these students in the cohorts may be also going out of district to Governor Wentworth and some of the labs and different
Correct.
stuff that we have. So it goes beyond our facility in planning anyway. So I'll make a motion going along with Mr. Shagnon that we table it till our next meeting.
A second.
Discussion?
My only discussion is I do want to thank Mr. Larkham. I think even though we've got still some questions and some things to iron out, there's been a lot of thought put into this and work done already, and I appreciate us, him doing that with the athletic committee. But hopefully we can iron out some more kinks and have a positive outcome for sports.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion?
Yeah, this is Stan.
Go ahead,
I
Stan.
would agree with what Joel just said. I would also like to see a plan. Once we figure out all these things, I'd like to see what our protocols will be and what our plans will be to go from point A to point B with these teams so we can, the community is, that's what we can be more sure about what's going to happen. The community can also be a little bit more sure how we're going to deal with it.
And I think that plan would become an appendix to the reopening plan. It just makes sense to have everything in one area and standardize those, how we're going to deal with exposures or different situations.
Right. I mean, that could be added to the plan if and when we resolve it.
Yep. Okay.
So any discussion on the motion? Not hearing any, all in favor?
Aye.
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 No.
One opposed, Josh opposed. Motion passes, 4-1. Next we have on our agenda.
I guess my question would be, it was tabled to the next meeting. Do we have a date for that next meeting?
I don't know. Are we having
Because
a meeting
we're-
next week?
Well, we certainly.
Because this
it
is an
sounds like-
additional meeting, right?
No, actually, this was our regular meeting.
Schedule.
This is the scheduled meeting, so.
May I suggest August 31st, since the following Monday is Labor Day?
Yeah, I'm okay with it. That's our next regular scheduled meeting.
Well, if you schedule it, it will become your next regularly scheduled meeting.
Do we need it before then?
What's that?
Do we need it before then? I guess I'd ask Eric. Does he need it before the 31st? Or can you get the materials that we need before the 31st is probably the better question.
Well,
Yeah, I think, I would say that's fine. 31st
Okay.
gives me a little bit of time to weed out some of the things that we need to do.
okay,
All right.
sounds
thank you.
good. Moving along next to snow plowing. This is kind of, at the last meeting
It might have been a couple meetings ago.
yeah, but we had a motion to award it? Or, I forget where we left off, to be honest.
I believe where it was left off is that we had received a bid.
Right.
We only received one bid. It was a
Right.
3-year bid. There was discussion as to whether or not we would, the bid wasn't accepted as it was written.
Right.
The question was, would we accept it as a 1-year bid if the
would they-
bidder was willing?
Right.
The bidder has indicated that they are willing to do just a 1-year bid. And then you had also asked for specific,
Spec.
the
Right.
specs for what that is, and I've included that
Yeah, I did
as
go,
well.
I did go through the specs. I mean, I think that's a good start. I think over each year, you probably will add some stuff when things come up that are concern or not clear to the subcontractor. It might be said, okay, this wasn't maybe clear enough, so we're just gonna add that in. And then it'll kind of formalize the document to when and if we have a different contractor. Because right now, this contractor's been doing it for how many years, Larry?
At least 12.
Okay, so,
A while.
I mean, they have a pretty good working relationship to know what's understood. But I think in the long term, it needs to be in the RFP or RFQ so that other people know what they're quoting and what's expected of the vendor.
I'll make a motion that we award the snow plowing contract as written.
As written, so the 3 years or the 1 year?
1 year.
Okay.
So a motion to award it to
Mr. Cardinal?
Mr. Cardinal for 1 year.
Yeah.
Do we have a
Maybe-
second?
may want to amend it to his official company name. I don't know what that is. The Cardinal and Son.
S. Cardinal and Sons.
As Cardinal and Son. I'll second with a friendly amendment per the work instructions supplied by Larry. As part of that award, that per his document.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because that was a little bit different than the RFP.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I meant by my motion,
Okay.
so that's fine.
Yeah, because there wasn't any detailed instructions in the RFP. So any discussion on that? Not hearing any, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye. Aye.
So you won't be shoveling the parking lot, Larry?
What, was that 4 or 5?
That was for Joel?
We may not have Joel. Okay.
That was 4 and 1.
Hold on.
One looking,
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm trying to hit I couldn't hit my mute button.
Hit Control D, it'll get you there better.
Yeah, I voted yes. Oh, you
Okay.
did?
Thank you, yes.
Oh,
Control D will get you the same place without fighting with it disappearing.
oh, okay.
Okay, thank you.
okay, good. Moving along, we have roof bids, which we received in the end of last week. Staff had summarized the bid scope. I don't know who wants to speak to the board about the summary. Oh. Go ahead, Brian. Take it away.
Let's start with the Henry Wilson School.
Okay.
We had 7 bids come in. The administrative team of myself, Larry, and Ruth Ellen sat down, went through the bids with a fine-tooth comb, came up with the 3 top bidders, one of them being Exeter Roofing, the other one being Progressive Roofing, and the third being Kevin W. Smith and Son. The one issue we have really with Exeter Roofing is they're not only were their cost higher on the skylight replacements, but they are not bonded and they will not pull a bond. So that kind of knocks them kind of out because they need to be bonded to do any work with us. Progressive Roofing bid on the entire project, including all the add-ons, which Exeter Roofing, I think, did not. I confirmed today their availability is still 2 to 3 weeks, depending on material delivery, once they can get material delivery here. And Kevin W. Smith and Son also bid on the entire project, including the add-ons. So really what it comes down to is Progressive and Kevin W. Smith. And I believe Progressive was one of the ones that bid the last time as well, so they were pretty familiar with the project and the needs and the building itself.
So, questions from the board?
We hired a construction manager on this to review some of the paperwork and get some of the bids out. Have we received a recommendation back from him?
That's also in your board packet.
Okay.
That came in today.
So does that align with what the administrative
Well, he
recommendations?
just put them in order of price.
He put them in order. He did express some concerns regarding, the same concerns regarding
Okay.
Exeter Roofing. As far as kind of having them go through what they bid. I do share the concern with them not being bonded or
Right.
pulling a bond, and their price does not seem to be in line and may not be a valid bid. That's my concern.
Isn't the bond a requirement by statute over a certain amount of money?
Over a certain amount it is. This is just under that, but certainly prudent to have it anyway.
So if going through the Henry Wilson bid, what were the additions that were quoted?
The additions that were quoted for Henry Wilson were
Skylights.
skylights
The lower
and a
roof.
lower roof.
Well, yeah. So okay. Go ahead, Larry, please come up to the mic. I know this is one of your babies, so.
It's been a long birthing process.
You've been carrying this baby for a while.
Yeah, basically, the only difference between the former bid and this bid is the lower roof is now on the opposite side of the building next to the gym. That's the one that we've discovered has more issues than the roof L, I think it will, way over in the over the SAU and stuff. We took that one out as the add-on and put the one next to the gym that's over the UA hall and stuff in instead.
So, I guess we took that one out.
That one we haven't had issues with.
Okay.
Yeah. Ours
But
isn't
isn't-
leaking, that one is.
Right, in Henry Wilson, wasn't there some repairs to be done on a section that was in the original scope? Is that still in the scope?
Masonry wall,
The masonry wall needs to be
Yeah.
done, but that's not in this bid.
No.
That we have still to deal with that.
yes. But we're going to try to deal with it internally.
Right, but I was, when I did the walkthrough with you, I thought there was a couple areas that needed to be patched.
Those were listed.
Okay, that's in this bid
That's in
scope?
here.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, I just
Yeah,
want to make sure.
there's two small areas.
Yeah, right, those small
Yeah.
areas, you showed them to me.
Yep.
So between those, saying it's progressive, well, let me get to your summary sheet. Now, the next highest bidder was close or not close?
Not close.
Not close.
Not close.
Kevin W. Smith was 114.6, Progressive was 65.
And
What was budget on that?
The budget on that was
157.
157.
now, what were they what are they quoting for materials? Is that an EPDM, is that a EPO,
This
It's
was the
a-
EPD, the,
EPDM?
EPDM.
Yeah, okay, which is what we have now on the roof.
yeah, we only had
In these
one,
areas
that-
that are being replaced.
we only had one company that bid the other two materials.
Okay, yeah,
Right, and this is adding the 3 inches of insulation to it.
3 inches
the 3
insulation.
Yep. And the 7 skylights.
right. Any roof drains replacement in this bid scope?
No.
Just not, that's on the high school.
Oh, yeah, excuse me, yes, there are. There's 3.
And those are being replaced at the roof line until we get below the roof for where they attach?
Yes.
Okay. Do you feel, Larry, that this addresses the needs that need to be done at that building?
At this time, yeah.
Okay.
Do you see any immediate future needs? Next year's budget, or are we good to go for a while on our roofs?
No, we've got some other pieces that need to be in line.
Yeah, as, maybe not next year, but
Not too far out.
Soon, okay.
Any other questions from the board regarding this first Henry Wilson School bid? I don't know if we want to talk about the other bid also before we
Is it
make a
different?
motion?
Is it different companies in the other bid, or do we?
Some companies bid both, some companies bid just one or the other. So, but they were listed as separate bids, so I don't know if you want to award this one separately or look at them both and then come back and award.
I'd like to look at the other bid to see that also, unless the board wants to dispose of this one now. I think because the same contractors were in the top 3 in the other one? Or is it
Two of them were.
Two of them were, yeah. On the high school, Progressive came out first, and the reason why Exeter didn't in this case is because not only the bond, but they didn't bid all the extras that we really needed. So, I don't think they bid any. The only extra they did was the access ladder. But Progressive did it all, same availability. I did check with them, if they were awarded both bids, they would just do one job at a time. But I stressed that we really want the Henry Wilson School done first, given the choice. They need the most work. And they could handle it, but it would just be whenever they finished, they would just move from one building to another.
Yeah, I think based upon their lead time, it doesn't seem to be a scheduling issue for us because they didn't have a long lead time. Some of the other ones had longer lead times.
And on the high school, the Melanson didn't bid the overhang roof either. So that,
And they were higher.
yes.
Did they Progressive Roofing furnish any references, say, of the last 3 jobs from municipalities or schools?
Progressive. They did not. but I can always get them from them if they need.
On the high school one where they were, I guess the lowest, what we feel qualified better. It was with all the additions, which is basically the roof plus the ladder. That was the only addition.
In the bond.
And the bond, which is 127,650.
Correct.
And they're quoting EPDM on this,
Correct.
Correct.
which is what the current material is.
Ballast,
It's ballast.
And removing the ballast.
yes,
Removing the ballast, because there's EPDM underneath that, putting on EPDM with no ballast.
right,
All new drains.
yes. All new drains, all new inserts in the drains.
And I know there's some discussion regarding fasteners versus bonding.
There was some discussion, I believe that it came up during the walkthrough.
Yeah.
There was a comment looking to do this as economically or as cheaply as possible. And we said, well, but we are looking to use mechanical fastener screws as opposed to just an adhesive on that deck.
But are we sure that we may not have any penetrations into electrical or any services? Oh,
We didn't on the prior one.
okay. So we don't have any, I mean, I've seen some roofs where it's run right underneath the steel,
Yeah,
electrical.
Most of our wiring and stuff is run down below on the lower
Because
ceiling.
in this bid package, if there is say a puncture, we're liable.
Yeah,
We understand that.
Okay. So, but there's not a high probability. Because in my building, I had several
Oh,
that were pre-existing, and you could see it, because that's when the electrical code back then, they were allowed to run the EMT right up against the sheathing for the roof, and then you're pretty much guaranteed you're gonna get one. So if we don't have that, then,
I haven't seen any up on the roof. I've seen it strung
right.
over the lower ceiling.
What was budget on this project?
318.7.
yeah, 437.
437, sorry.
And the bid's at
127.
127.
But it was quoted totally different materials. And it was, like I said, the bid was, it had some challenges.
So is the high school recommendation for the bid the same as the middle school?
Correct.
It is for us. And if you look at what Mr. Greenhall has given you, that would be the next in line too, beyond the one that he lists with concerns.
I'll make a motion that we award the bid to the administrator's recommendation.
For which, both?
Both.
Well, I make a friendly amendment that'd be contingent upon
References.
references checked to the satisfaction of the business director and the superintendent,
I'm good with that.
and them supplying the necessary paperwork and bond as required by the bid.
Yep, I'm fine with that.
Any discussion?
That's for both?
Yep. Because the motion was toward both the progressive roof.
But they don't have to come back to us if they don't get any negative information, correct?
Yeah, that will be
Just
my.
check the references, they're good, then
If
we're
there's an
good.
issue, then you need to come back to us. I mean,
Okay.
ideally, I'd like to see them give you references for municipalities or schools, because that's similar to what we have, not residential or
Right.
new construction commercial.
Right.
That's not what we have. So, and then, that's to ensure that, besides asking around, I'm sure you can find some other districts that may have used them. I mean, you can say, who have you used in the past, and please give me your last three, so they may say we've used Gilmington Ironworks or whatever like that, and you can call for those and then check the most three recent jobs. We want to make sure that they, some of the things is correctness. I mean, cleanliness is a big issue, and how they manage on a site, because we are a school. There's a lot of precautions that we need to make sure they're good at. Any other discussion on the motion? Not hearing it, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So I guess my next question is, so don't get up, Larry. Is this something that you think you're gonna be able to manage, or should we consider getting some contract managers to babysit them? I mean, we do have the summer right now, so maybe,
I would rather have somebody babysit them, personally,
okay.
only because it's a little above my expertise to tell them, yes,
So-
I know you're doing these seams right and everything.
Right.
Plus COVID.
Is that?
Plus everything he's doing with COVID.
Right. No, that's why I wanted to ask that question. I know Jeff Greenhaw's given us a proposal. I guess maybe if Brian can reach out to him to say the board is considering having some professional, and can he fulfill that timeline-wise? Because I don't know what his schedule is. And he's given us a proposal. I mean, we may, not saying we may not consider a proposal from somebody else. But like I said, it's an important job, and typically, if we can have somebody watch over them and assist Larry to make sure that it's done right, the site is clean, they're working safely based upon the requirements. And like I said, Jeff had given us a proposal. I don't know what his availability is, and he may not be available based upon their start date.
Right.
So if he's available and the board wants to proceed with him, if not, I think that I would like the board to bring us some other options, because I think it's important to get Larry some assistance in this case, because we got to make sure it's done right, and the best way to ensure that is to have somebody on top of them, and the amount of money that it's going to cost us, we're going to save in the long run. Because especially when we have a bid package and somebody gets into discussion, whether it's in the scope or not, this is where somebody with experience is used to dealing with it. And instead of saying, okay, I'm not used to dealing with a contractor coming back with change orders, when hopefully our bid spec is solid enough that inclusive. Yeah, I mean, based upon the bid spec, yeah, if there's some KD lumber around the perimeter and that's rotten, needs to be replaced, yeah, that's on us. That's clear. If they find some stuff, the materials which are wet or rotted, and that's additional labor, yeah, that's on us. I mean, we've had some scans done, but that doesn't mean that
Doesn't
it's
guarantee.
problem-free. I'm sure there's going to be some problems. But there's also making sure that the subcontractor lives up to his end of the bargain.
Can I clarify, because you said the board come back with other suggestions, and just looking at our time frame, because if you're not meeting again until the 31st, we've got 2 weeks, so I mean, certainly we can reach out to Mr. Greenhall pretty quickly, but if we're looking at soliciting other proposals here,
Well, I'm okay with entering into a motion giving you the authority to enlist him if you can do it to our satisfaction. But
So do we
But-
want
but if
to
you-
do a motion for that to start with, or?
And are you looking for a project manager or just to oversee?
he's given
He's given us specs.
He's given us a quote spec. You can review it and look at it, see if it's...
I'll share that with you, Brian. It was back in June.
Yeah, I mean, we asked him, and I think there was 2 phases?
There were three
Three
phases.
phases.
He's completed the first phase, so
Right.
this would be.
So we asked him initially give us a cost proposal on those phases, what made sense. And depending on whether we needed his services to go forward, we could potentially consider other phases. We only approved the first phase. And then that's what my request to Larry was, does he need some help? And I would encourage that, because it's an important thing. Somebody's got to oversee these guys, and Larry's got enough to do. I think we have this cost savings that we certainly can afford some project management.
So are you making the motion, or?
I'll make the motion to enlist
Jeff Greenhouse?
Jeff Greenhaw's services per his previous proposal, if he's available and can complete the oversight that we require.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
So if he's not available,
We got to find somebody. And if we need to have,
Ask him for recommendations.
that's what I figured.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I don't know what his availability is, and I don't want to just say, yeah, we're going to have him do it, because he's a
No,
small
obviously, if
company.
he's not available,
If he's
then
not
that's-
available, then we've got to find somebody else. But I think it's important to get somebody on it.
Can I make a follow-up motion?
We got to vote on that.
Okay.
Right? Any
Yeah.
other discussion on that motion? Not hearing any. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm going to be pretty close to contracting services over the 5,000 mark, so I'm going to make a motion that we waive bid for the administration and allow them to enter into the contract as proposed.
For Jeff Greenhouse
Greenhouse,
Services.
right.
We have a motion, do we have a second? I'll second for discussion. I don't know what the second phase was, I know it was close to that, but
I'll have to go back and look. It did run
I
pretty
believe it
close.
was
It was like
7.
total?
It was 7 total, but having taken out the first chunk, we're going to be really close up against the 5. So
Okay.
Especially if we run into some unforeseen circumstances that he's going to have to put a little bit extra time in or whatever.
Right. Any discussion on the motion? Not hearing any, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Just need one more.
no, I think that was 2 on top of
Oh,
each
was
other.
it? Oh, okay.
Did we get Stan? You were an aye.
Yes, I was.
Okay, I thought so. Okay.
Anything else for that project? Nope. Okay, let us know if you need any, let's say if Jeff's not available to do it and you get some recommendations, he might be able to give you some. I don't know where else we could reach out. I mean, I could make some calls to find somebody if you,
And
I got people I can call.
so I guess my question, if he's not available and we end up with a list of others that are under that $5,000 threshold, do you want us to bring it back to you or do you want us to find someone and go?
We're into time limits. If Jeff's going to recommend him, I know his reputation. He's not going to represent somebody that's going to do a halfway job to us. If it's under $5,000, I say let the administrator run with it.
any other discussion? I'm okay with that.
Okay. So is that a motion?
Get it done. That's a motion.
I'll second. Any other discussion on the motion, which is to authorize the superintendent business administrator to find somebody under the 5,000 if Jeff's not available?
Second.
Not hearing any discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Was that to find someone to recommend or to just hire?
If-
Hire him.
If he's not
Jeff
available,
If Jeff recommends someone and we find somebody that we can get going with to do it.
if he can't do it. So it doesn't have to come back before us if they can find a candidate, recommended candidate if Jeff can't do it. I guess that's the motion. Otherwise, it's got to come back for the board. Do you understand that, Joel? Questions, concerns?
Say that again, sorry.
So the motion is to allow the SAU with consult for Jeff, if I was a replacement for him, if he's not available, authorize the SAU to go out and retain that person if it's under 5,000.
Okay,
So is that an aye on your part?
no, it's a no.
Okay, it's a no. So it was
Got it.
4-1. Stan, what was your vote on the motion?
I voted yes.
Okay.
Josh?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Moving on. I should have made a bet with Larry.
Yeah, I should have.
Oh, maybe not. I still might lose, though. I still might lose.
Careful.
Moving along to construction at risk.
My question here, we can certainly discuss generalities. There are some specifications here, whether or not you want to do these in public or in non-public as you look at the specific items. Earlier, Tim had asked me about the amounts. The grant was $74,235.
Yeah.
We need to match at least 14,850 or so of that. We have $55,000 in Article 7 from last year that was set aside for this.
Yep.
We are agents to expend the security CRF that was established in March. There's $50,000 there. And then there was $50,000 that was encumbered out of the June 230 unexpended fund balance. So in total, that's $229,235.
But the proposals before us are how much?
The proposals before you,
150.
And I think in the previous discussion on Henry Wilson, you said that there was some things that could come out of that, like 10,000?
right.
So that number you give me, is that with or without that?
High school is roughly 36, roughly the same for
Right.
Valley View, and then Henry Wilson was, with what could come down, it would take us to about 72 or so. So
So adding those three up, what is our total
roughly
and what's our budget?
Roughly $143,000. So we have more available to us than this would require.
So if you did the
doing.
74 plus the 14 is 88, plus the 55, which was authorized at town meeting,
Correct.
that gets you to 143?
And then you have 50,000 that was encumbered
Right.
from unexpended. And then, if
So
need be, there is an additional 50 that's sitting in the
Yeah,
capital
and the total
reserve.
was-
So what's our shortage though on the two? Because it's
We don't have a
roughly,
shortage.
that's where I'm going with that.
We're not short. I had forgotten about the other, the capital reserve and the 50 that was encumbered, so.
Yeah, so in essence, it was between what the grant was, plus what was approved at town meeting.
Plus the match.
Plus, right.
Well, I counted the match. It came, those came up to 143, and what was this projected total? It was 72 and 72, 144. Right?
But you didn't include the encumbrance from June. That was an additional 50,000.
Right. But I'm saying, the total before us is basically 144.
Correct.
And what was this grant plus the match plus the 55 is 143.
Right. So we're
So in
close.
essence, the
So we could-
50,000,
We could spend 1,000 out of the 50,000 encumbered and the other one would go back to fund balance because that money can only be spent on this project.
Correct. That money can't be spent on anything else.
right, so we could spend that out of the capital reserve, or are you saying the extra
I'm saying what we encumbered,
okay,
Yeah.
we'll take the additional out of encumbered.
right? Because
The rest in the fund.
yeah, not knowing what we're going to get for safety expenses or where our budget's going this year, we
Leaving that in
may want to
capital
leave
reserve
that
is a
where
good
it
idea.
is. So I would spend 1,000 out of the 50,000 that we encumbered and return the rest to the taxpayer.
Well, I don't know if it exactly comes down to that. I mean, motion might want to be,
There may be a little, but
But we encumbered the money, which
We
basically is authorized. I mean, do you want a motion to,
well, I guess is the board comfortable making this decision, or we want to have some discussion in non-public? Are we okay going forward as a board?
I'm okay with the recommendations looking at the specs without having to have that discussion in public or non-public.
has everyone else had a chance to look at those thoroughly enough to be good to go at this point?
I'm fine.
Okay, and in this case, this company is just managing us front to back.
Yes.
So they're basically managing as they're the construction manager, and we're gonna hold them accountable from front to back. And we're not gonna pay them till we're 100% there's no progress for payments on this? It's quoted after, or is money up front? How did they quote this to us? How was the spec? I mean, we're paying the whole money after we're satisfied and complete, or is there 50% down? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know if they got to that or not.
Actually, that part wasn't included in this part, so I'll have to get that back from them. The original quote was much more because the original specifications were.
Right, so I guess that's a concern.
Yep.
It needs to be in our favor. I'd like to see everything at the end if possible, but it may not be realistic.
There may need to be some materials purchased.
Right. But I think that's something that Brian will probably, and you and Brian will have to hammer out with them.
Sure.
They may be fine, but depend, because this may, what's this expected timeframe?
They've given us that they could do fairly soon, but soon is one of those waffling things. So depending upon at what point they had a,
So
yes, we could go
actually,
forward.
This, if we were to make this motion, it would be contingent upon acceptable timeline and payment terms as determined by the SAU
Do we have references?
and references.
Yes.
Okay.
Because they could come back with a timeline and we say, that's not gonna work. I don't think that's the case, but.
Can we put that in a motion authorizing the superintendent to enter into that with those conditions so that we're done with it? Because we are under timelines of this project.
I think it can be done by a motion, that, let me see if I can get to the right folder. So on the Henry Wilson, those things that are getting subtracted, are those listed? Or is there
We were
specific-
looking at eliminating the wall that would create
Okay, so
the
it's the two
additional.
alternates, deducting the two alternates?
Yes. I mean, I guess technically, there's sufficient there, it could be done, but it's not the most crucial part of the job.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Does it make sense that to do those now? Or in this,
It would be more disruptive.
it's more disruptive, they may not get it done?
Yeah, it will disrupt both of those offices quite a bit more. Right now, it leaves the spaces fairly intact, and it's just a matter of moving from one to the other. To modify those will probably be another, good, at least 4 to 5 days that they don't have access to those spaces.
So at this point, we've also probably got to consider waiving the bid requirement, right? What?
They were one of our bids, I believe.
This was
Right.
bid,
Yeah. But
and
now
then
the
we
scope is
went
totally
back,
changed.
we went back out to them and asked for others to narrow it back down in, and this was the one
But
that
we
was
did
willing
ask
to do the
everybody.
narrow.
We asked everybody.
Okay.
In the initial thing, it was all three. All three were included.
Right. So we went through our bid process, we had to narrow the scope, we went back to everybody, 2 companies that came back. Yeah, so I guess we don't have to waive the bid requirement. So I'll take a shot at this motion. I'll make a motion to award or give the SA Superintendent and Business Administrator authorization to award the contract to Structure Tone for the safety upgrades for the Henry Wilson, Valley View, and Farmington High School. And in the Henry Wilson bid, to go with the 2 alternate deducts for an approximate total of $145,000. And that'd be contingent upon satisfactory negotiations of the payment terms, timeline, and references to the satisfaction of the school district. Miss anything?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Well, you just cut out a non-public. Just shortened the meeting.
Yeah. I'm going to make a motion that the next item on the agenda, finalizing the reopening plans, that we move that to non-public under safety and security. there's a lot of safety and security issues with that plan that we're going to have to discuss that really shouldn't be discussed in public session.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, seconded by Joel. Discussion.
Can you repeat your question?
Motion is to move the finalizing the reopening plans to non-public under safety.
That was Josh.
I think so.
Any discussion on that, Josh? Concerns?
No.
Stan, any discussion?
No.
I'm short on discussion tonight. Not hearing any discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
One opposed.
I'm going to make a motion that we table F, handbooks, on the second read. I've given my reasons in personnel. It's not something I want to say in public meeting.
Okay.
So I'll second. Any discussion? I mean, I think there's something we just got to get done, but I don't think it's earth-shattering, but we'll go through it. Not hearing any discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Stands opposed. Moving on to new business. We have Farmington's Women's Club. Maybe you can tell us what this is about.
The Farmington Women's Club every year does their large craft fair at Henry Wilson along with their pie sale. It's one of their primary fundraisers, and a good portion of those proceeds go to the principal's funds and scholarships here for Farmington High School. With everything going on in the upheaval, they have declined to do their craft fair this year, but they are looking to do their pie sales. They're looking to do an online ordering, and they're requesting being able to use Henry Wilson for distribution of those orders. The request came to me, can we just be outside the doorway, because that's where people are used to coming to get their pies that Sunday before Thanksgiving, and maybe if the weather is horrible, could we step in between the two doors so that we're not too terribly cold? With everything that this group has done for the schools, I would really recommend that we try to find a way to make this happen for them. But again, that's the board's decision.
Discussion?
I just have,
To allow the women's club to use Henry Wilson.
Second.
Seconded by Joel. Discussion?
just a quick point.
Go ahead.
I don't have any problem with them using Henry Wilson. My only concern is having picked up my kids at dances, the line can get long, and their pies are delicious, so I'm going to order a bunch of them.
Order early.
And I'll vote for Henry Wilson, but do we want to offer them something like Valley View, where they can do the same concept, but we're not going to tie up the neighborhood with cars lined up going up there, because we're doing drive-through versus parking.
What would the high school be done?
Or if they did the back of Henry Wilson. Because then they could
Either
come
or,
the other way.
I'm
Yeah.
fine with. My only concern is how do we mitigate any traffic on School Street?
Right.
And I'll go with, you know, I'd like to make a friendly amendment that we authorize the superintendent to let them use one of our facilities, and they can decide kind of what works for them, if that makes sense.
What works for the SAU?
Or what works for the SAU.
Stan, it's your motion.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Okay. Joel, you seconded it. You good with the friendly amendment to allow? Yep. Any other discussion? Not hearing any discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
I abstain. My wife's on the Women's Club. I'll abstain.
I love those pies.
And this way, since they're doing online orders ahead of time, what you order should be there. So
Right.
that helps.
Yeah.
It's not be there at 9 o'clock or don't get what you wanted.
Yeah, I think Tim makes a good point. There might be a better spot that's got less traffic issues.
Yep. Okay.
Anything else for new business? I thought I had one, but I can't think of
Trying to think what I do.
Go ahead.
My understanding from talking to the community is we had 291A requests for the documents submitted to the full board by the union. Is that correct?
I've had one.
Okay.
One that's come to me anyway.
Okay. I've been told there were two, but what was the
Nothing came to me.
what was the result of that request? Was it granted or denied?
It was denied based on legal counsel saying that because this is part of negotiations, it is not subject to public disclosure until such time that both sides have reached a determination.
I'm going to make a motion that we overrule the superintendent on that decision and grant the 91A for the following reason. Number one, the document was sent to the full board by means of an email and not just distinctly the negotiations committee, nor was it dropped at the SAU. We then had both union presidents address at a public meeting and tell the public that most of those concerns in there, although they mirrored our reopening plan, were safety concerns. That is far from transparent based on what I read in that document. And I think that this is information that the public has filed for. I think the Supreme Court has said over and over again, very recently in the Concord decision, that the public has a right to know, and that our objective should be erring on the side of transparency and releasing those documents. Therefore, that's my reasoning behind the motion.
Do we have a second on the motion? Going once, going twice. Who seconded?
Josh.
Josh?
Josh seconded. Discussion. I guess my discussion is, I certainly hear your point. I guess for me, does it make sense to table the discussion until we've had a chance to talk about it in non-public under legal? So Ruth Ellen can give us her opinion whether or not that makes sense, based upon her correspondence with legal.
If your motion is to move it to non-public to legal, then I'll withdraw my motion.
Well, there's a motion, okay.
Well, you've got to act on one motion before, unless you're making
Well,
an amendment to that motion.
That would be my suggestion. You can withdraw your motion if you want, because I can see myself kind of on the fence on both sides. It's really what that I think we should hear from Ruth Allen. She's had correspondence with legal counsel, and I'd be willing to make, and then I'd be more prepared to make a decision one way or the other after that.
Okay. I'll withdraw my motion.
But are we, Mr. King,
What?
are we gonna hear something from the superintendent that we just didn't hear? I mean, she just said that council advised us not to. Is there more detail to that, Mr. Warren?
I don't know,
And I think,
but I think we could ask some candid questions regarding, say, that she could answer more
in non-public.
better in non-public. I don't know that answer, but I wasn't the one that spoke to the attorney. She was. She furnished some correspondence. She did furnish me some RSAs citing the two areas where that kind of spoke to this, just in case somebody contacted me regarding it. I didn't look into it personally, so I wouldn't say that I have a 100% opinion one way or the other at this point.
Do we have to have a motion to move that to non-public?
Well, let's see, we have non-public scheduled right now for personnel, nominations, resignations, safety, and negotiations.
I'll make a motion that we move my new business to non-public under legal.
Second, seconded by Joel. Any discussion? Not hearing any, all in favor? Aye.
No.
Stands opposed. Okay, Ruth Allen, what else do you have for new business?
I don't.
You sure? I thought there was something. Trying to keep Larry up. You sure? Anything else for public? Brian?
Just the manifest.
Just a manifest. So I'll make a motion to go into non-public and then 91, you said we don't have a personnel?
We do have
We do
personnel.
have personnel.
I thought we might not have had safety and security, but that's been taken care of as well.
So I'll
So
make a
we have all of
motion to
these.
go into non-public session in RSA 91A:3, 2 ABC personnel.
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, everyone have a good night.